short introduction. Thank you. Well, let's have a word for Alex Arnold first. Alex, can you introduce yourself and Taos Institute?
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you for having us here today. So I'm Alex Arnold. I am the executive consultant for the Taos Institute. I'll say just a few words about the Taos Institute. We are a nonprofit educational organization. We're an entirely virtual organization, and our mission is to create promising futures one conversation at a time. So we bring together scholars, practitioners, students, change agents, everyone interested in social constructionist, relational, and appreciative ideas and practices. We work through many disciplines and across the world. We try to offer resources and events in several languages. And part of the resources that we offer are workshops, courses, conferences. We have had a diploma program, certificate programs, and PhD programs over the years. We also have a publication branch, the Taos Institute publication. This is what brings us here today, thanks to the work of Loek translating one of our books, The Relational Imperative. And lots of other free resources are available on our website. I will put our website in the chat in a moment. So we have videos, podcasts, dissertations, manuscripts, lots and lots of resources on social construction that I invite you to familiarize yourself with. And recently we launched an online community, the Taos Institute Commons. It is a free global online community that everyone is invited to join as well. This is where we post our announcements, our events. We have several opportunities each month to come together in small groups on a variety of topics for different events. And this month in particular, we are celebrating our 30th anniversary. So we have a video collection that we are announcing every day. We are sharing a video this month that shows the impact of the Taos Institute and social construction around the world over these many years. So it's available in the online community, and I hope that you will join us. So thanks again, Look, for organizing this event and having us today.
And thank you for helping me as a host to have the technical things in place. So thank you, Alex. Let's have a word for Ken. Ken, can you introduce yourself? Who are you?
Yeah. The two of you make it seem so easy to who you are and what the Taos Institute is. I have to talk about social construction in a few minutes, and it really makes it extremely difficult for me to say who I am.
Yeah.
I would have to engage in an individual conversation with each of you, and then I would know who I was within that conversation. Some of the things that one normally says is that I advanced research professor at Swarthmore College, which is a small liberal arts college on the East Coast of the United States, where I taught psychology for many years. I'm also the head of the Taos Institute and have been so for about 30 years. I am primarily a scholar who is interested in practice. I was primarily a scholar only for maybe 2 decades, but realized that it's a hermetic circle with no escape and not much contribution to the world. So I've spent most of my time trying to move between theory and practice, trying to learn from practitioners, trying to develop ideas which may be useful or helpful, which is largely what social construction is about, and also relational theory. Those are face sheet characteristics. If you see me in the morning when I wake up, I am likely to be lying there with a cat on my chest, waiting to be stroked for about 10 minutes. If you go outside in my yard, you are likely to see a golden woman standing in a tree somewhere in the distance. And I won't say more about that, but you can put it into the chat or the questions. Perhaps that's enough.
Thank you, Ken. So for the I will translate a little bit in Dutch. So voor de Nederlandse groep, Ken Gergen is, hij is zeer bescheiden, denk ik, vanavond. Maar hij is toch wel een van de meest invloedrijke denkers van deze tijd. En je zult ook straks zien dat dat hele gedachtegoed van social construction natuurlijk zo'n dramatische andere kijk op de werkelijkheid geeft. En daarom tot zeer hoopvolle oplossingen kan leiden. En daarin is Ken met eigenlijk zijn levenswerk rondom social construction wel erg beroemd. Dus ik ga even zijn bescheidenheid een beetje oppoetsen. I won't translate everything for you, Ken, but I talked a little bit about your importantness in your life work about social construction. And you are quite humble. That's what I like about you. But I think you are very important. Your ideas, your thought is very important in this world, which is in tension. We will talk later about it. What we will do from now is that we will have a short connection exercise so that you also can getting to know each other in breakout rooms. And from that, we will shortly talk about social construction, because I think not for all people, it's clear what is social construction. We will talk about, Ken and I will talk about it around 10-15 minutes. And then we will go to the book, The Relational Imperative, the Relationele Noodzaak, and then Ken will give an introduction about the book. After the introduction, again, you will go back into your breakout rooms to talk about it and to formulate one question. Then we come back so that we all can be active in the dialogue. And in the end, we will talk a little bit about what do you take home. And then I think it's 9 o'clock, time to have perhaps a coffee or tea or something strong. So that's the program for this evening. I hope you will enjoy it. And perhaps there will be more conversations after this webinar. That would be great. So let's first do our connection exercise. So Alex will make breakout rooms, and you will put in breakout rooms and be curious about the people you are going to meet in this breakout room. I have one question when you go in the breakout room. And the question is, what attracted you to this webinar? Dus de vraag is dadelijk, je gaat in een breakout room en de vraag is, wat heeft je aangetrokken om je aan te melden vanavond? Waar ben je nieuwsgierig naar? Ga dat even in een paar minuten met elkaar bespreken. Jullie hebben 5 minuten. You will have 5 minutes to talk in the breakout rooms about the question, what did attract me to this webinar? What am I curious about? I think the question is very clear. So Alex will make breakout rooms. You will be put in groups of 3 about. Yeah. Okay. So have fun, meet each other, and be curious, make new friends. So it's great to see you coming back. It looks almost like Star Trek, you know. When I was a little boy, I was always watching Star Trek, and I like all this beaming of people. And now we are doing the same, I think. I hope you have liked this short meeting with new friends. I think that's one of the things of social construction is how can we be open for other perspectives, other people, strangers. And I think when we would do that more with curiosity and with appreciation, then perhaps the world would look a little bit different, I think. So welcome back from the breakout rooms. Well, social construction is perhaps for many people, for many participants today, a familiar word, or perhaps not. So perhaps a little exercise for the chat box. When you think of social construction, what kind of words or what sentence comes in your mind? Perhaps you can put it in the chat box. And meanwhile, Ken will talk about social construction, and I will ask perhaps some questions to Ken, just to have a short notice about what is social construction. Okay, so when you have some knowledge about social construction or words, please put it in the chat box. Ken, can I give you the word? What is social construction, in your opinion, as an expert?
Realize that whatever I say is going to be a reduction of an enormous body of writing and work and so on. So, I mean, I'll give whole courses on this issue, but all right, here's the short version. If you look at Western history, at least for the last 300 years, the hope has been, the attempt has been to have a grasp of what really exists around us, putting myth, putting ideology aside. What is the nature of reality? What is the real? And thus the profusion of sciences in the 20th century, the romance with measurement, prediction, and control, and so on. And in some sense, with the very idea of that ordering and prediction becoming built into Western culture as a kind of zeitgeist, particularly in the 20th century, where prediction and control and order were like central to not only government, but the ways in which we live our lives. Social construction really began as a critique and a search for an alternative of that particular orientation, which was in some sense encapsulating, which was reductive, which was controlling our lives in many respects. But the basic idea emerging from these critiques is that the search for the world as it is, what is really there, is a fallacious orientation. Putting it radically, whatever we take the world to be emerges out of our relationships with each other, so that we bring the world into being what it is by virtue of our relationships. The world doesn't require any particular understanding, doesn't require any particular language or discourse. We can view it in many, many different ways with different outcomes. Let me give you an example to make this clear. A lot of you come out of education. You go into a classroom. What is the reality? How would you describe it? Many, many things are happening. What's there? How would you describe it? Chances are, if someone asked you as you were a teacher, your class like, you would say, well, look, I had majority were girls, 22 girls and 14 boys. Now that you could have said and not be questioned 10 years ago. There'd be no question. That is a fact. That is a fact in nature. Today, at least in the United States, you could not make that report without being looked at suspiciously, because now you've left out all those people who don't want to be classified in that way, who do not feel they belong in those categories and have ideological reasons for rejecting them. So the truth that we had 10, 20 years ago, or indeed for centuries, now becomes problematic. Right? Now you can begin to see the problems. Why do you so quickly presume that you can divide the world into men and women, girls and boys? Let me continue a little bit. All right, so there's this class, and there's a lot of movement, but you're struck by the movement of one child who's not paying attention. Now, why do you single that child out? Why is that a reality? Because for you as a teacher, it's a reality because that child should be paying attention. He should be mastering the work. He's going to be graded on that. His parents will care. I will care as a teacher. So he's an outlier, but he's only an outlier because of the way I view paying attention. Well, now we say, all right, now the child is not paying attention, and we develop a word for that. Not just, hey, pay attention, but attention deficit disorder. Now we've got it classified into a scientific orientation. We've grasped it out of a commonplace and put it into a scientific category where we can measure it, where we can get psychiatrists, psychologists to determine that that really is attention deficit disorder. We got treatments and we've got pharmaceuticals. Now, nobody asked the child, and that child did not have attention deficit disorder until there was a whole chorus now of teachers, therapists, psychiatrists, drug companies, and parents who are willing to join in to create the child as having attention deficit disorder, a fact in science. Drug companies are happy, making billions of dollars off this. Mental health professions, consultations, pay the bills. Teachers get high marks because their kids now score well on national tests. Parents are happy because the kid now is drugged into paying attention. But nobody asked the child. Nobody asked the child's friends. So the fact of having this disorder, again, requires a whole group of people brought together to place the child in that reality. Now you can begin to see, once you realize that these placements into categories come with a cultural background, with assumptions, with values. And there is no placement in a category, there is no description outside of that background. There is no object in itself until you exist within a culture of agreement about assumptions, about measurement, about values, about the future, and so on. So we co-create what we take to be the realities. Now, at that point, it's not only a question about science, which becomes one perspective among many. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means it has certain assumptions and certain outcomes, but that doesn't give it priority over all others. And it has its limitations, particularly in social science. Where we presume, for example, that there is cause and effect as our way of understanding. But it also raises the issue of critical pause. What are those realities that we find ourselves carrying out? Could they be otherwise? Who is helped? Who is hurt? What are the implications for any of them? So critique. Secondly, it opens up curiosity. It says, look, there are multiple perspectives. Science does certain things, and maybe other perspectives do other things. Why not be curious and open to the full range of traditions within the world? With traditions that have found value in certain practices, certain ways of life, might those not be shared so that we enrich ourselves by virtue of those relationships? So kind of an invitation to bring in multiple voices, to listen as much as to speak, to be open and curious to the alternatives. It's also to be quite concerned about conflict. And indeed, in my view, this is, and maybe I'll say more about this later on, the future of the world really depends right now on how we manage to work across multiple realities, multiple value perspectives, multiple ideas of what what is true and what is false, and what is right and what is wrong. And that we have not gotten better at this over time, which was my hope 30, 40 years ago. It seems to me we've become more polarized and balkanized than ever. It is also finally an invitation to be creative. Because if these realities which we share, which we've developed, are options, not requirements, they're options, we've co-created them as human beings. What could we create as alternatives? What could we amalgamate? What could we synthesize? What could we draw when we put multiple cultures or perspectives together? So this invitation will not ask what there is, but what there could be. If we talk together, what could happen? How could we look at it that might be somewhat better in terms of our future together than what we have now? All right, that's the short.
Yeah, it's short, and we can talk for many days, I think, about social construction. I was listening to your introduction, and then I can imagine that for some people who are not familiar to social construction, it can seem to be very complex. So I tried to translate it a little bit in Dutch, yes, just for a short moment. Dus als we het hebben over sociaal constructionisme, dat hele moeilijke woord, dan leg ik het meestal heel simpel uit. En dan zeg ik nou, sociaal betekent groep, een groep mensen. En construction betekent maken. De werkelijkheid maken, die werkelijkheid geef je taal. En doordat je samen taal geeft aan die werkelijkheid, krijgt die werkelijkheid betekenis. En wat Ken uitlegt is dat wij allemaal in sociale groepen leven. En op den duur wordt die betekenisgeving zo vanzelfsprekend dat we denken, onze kijk op de werkelijkheid is de juiste werkelijkheid, want dit kennen we. Voor ons is dat zo vanzelfsprekend. Hij illustreerde dat met een voorbeeld vanuit onderwijs, dat we onderwijs hebben opgezet vanuit een eeuwenoud systeem. En nog steeds denken we, ja, zo moet het, want zo is het ook ooit bedacht. Kinderen moeten luisteren, kinderen moeten in een boek leren, kinderen moeten een test afnemen. En als ze dat dan goed gedaan hebben, dan weten we wat ze geleerd hebben. Dat hele systeem, dat hele vanzelfsprekende denken, is een social construct eigenlijk. En wat Gergen aangeeft is, goed, als we die vanzelfsprekendheid gaan doorbreken en open gaan staan voor andere manieren van kijken naar de werkelijkheid, dus andere sociale constructen, en met andere mensen gaan praten, dan ontstaan er opeens alternatieven. Dan ontstaat er opeens ook andere manieren waarin we misschien niet meer praten over een leraar en een leerling, maar misschien over een coach of een regisseur of over een learning partner. En opeens gaat dat onderwijssysteem er anders uitzien, omdat we andere taal aan die werkelijkheid gaan geven. Dus social construction, sociaal samen, construction maken. Via taal maken we die werkelijkheid en dat doen we vooral via taal, want taal maakt werkelijkheid. Ik zie dat Randy van Ziegem uit Suriname er ook is. Welkom Randy. Vorige week hadden we een fantastische conferentieweek in Suriname, waarin we niet het traditionele deden van laten we een conferentie doen zoals het vanzelfsprekend altijd gezien wordt door ons. Een conferentie, er zitten mensen in de zaal, er komen beroemde sprekers, professoren, die gaan vertellen over wat ze allemaal weten. De zaal luistert, we denken, oké, ze zijn mee, ze gaan naar huis, maar eigenlijk weten we niks. We hebben het helemaal omgekeerd, we hebben er een dialogische conferentie van gemaakt. Waarom niet de tegenstemmen uitnodigen? Waarom niet de vreemde stem uitnodigen? Waarom niet de goede en de andere stem uitnodigen? Dat is eigenlijk waar Ken Gergen over spreekt. Dus sta open voor multiple perspectives, voor heel veel perspectieven. En dat is nou wat we in deze wereld nodig hebben. Daar gaan we dadelijk in de Relational Imperative, de Relational Noodzaak ook over verder praten. Just shortly for the English audience, I just explained in Dutch. I think it was hard to understand. A little bit about social construction, because I think for a lot of people it's a little bit a strange word, and when you are familiar with it, then it's very easier to understand what Ken is talking about. So when I explain it in English, very simple for my students, then I say social construction. Social means group, a group of people. Construction means making. A group of people makes the reality come true by using their language. So they give meaning by using language, by have interaction with each other. And then the important insight is that meanwhile, the way they give expression to their reality or understanding becomes something like we are used to think like. So after many, many times, we think, well, this is the world, this is how we look at the world, and this is how it is. And what Ken was talking about is that social construction opens the windows, you could say, for many ways of looking at reality, so that we can have multiple perspectives. And from this, we can build new futures by having new language, finding new options, and making the world a little bit better. Just a short introduction about social construction. I was talking about a conference in Suriname last week, and there we turned the common way of doing a conference, like inviting very important speakers. The audience is sitting and quiet, just a few people can speak. And then we say, well, we have a wonderful conference because we had a good dinner and we were great speakers. But we turned it around. We were looking for other options. We were thinking about this idea about making the conference a dialogical conference. So how can we let all the people be experts at the conference, that all the people talk with each other, and from this come with options to build better Suriname educational systems. So that was also what happened at the conference. So we break out of the common way of thinking, and we created a new way of doing a conference. Okay, I can also speak for hours, I'm noticing, so I will stop this. Let's talk about the relational imperative, because that's the book which attracted also you to this webinar. Thanks to the financial support of my institute, we could translate the book into Dutch, because I think it's so important that not only the English-speaking audience can reach out to all these great, terrific publications, but I was thinking, how can we attract also the Dutch-speaking people to getting to know this very important theory of social construction? So that's also the reason why we translated the book. And Ken, I ask you to give a short introduction about the relational imperative. Ik heb je gevraagd om een korte introductie dadelijk te geven. And after the introduction, you will put in breakout rooms to talk about a little bit about the relational imperative, and also to formulate one question which we can talk about when you come out of the breakout rooms. Yeah? Okay, I would like to give you the word, Ken, about the book, The Relational Imperative. What was the reason to write this book? What do you want to tell people?
First, realize that this is a small book, which is kind of a distillation of a very large book called Relational Being, which was published a number of years ago. But my wife, Mary, wanted very much for me to do something which would make some of the ideas accessible for a broad group without very much expense, just something to share. So it is a real distillation, a short version, in the very sense that when I talked about social construction, I'm just giving you the essence. Mm-hmm. But I should say, look, for those of you who are in particularly in the Netherlands, where I've spent a lot of time, constructionism, even though it may seem reasonable, is highly controversial in many of the universities there. There's been a lot of science wars, as they call it, going on, particularly in the social sciences. Relational being is also going to turn things on its head. It's a little bit more complicated to understand. It's and scholarly, it's the interest in, if you have social construction, how do we understand social? There's a question. Well, how do we construct that? Now we have already, at least in Western culture, a very easy way to construct it is the social is composed of individuals, like our screens, each of us in a box. So social is when those boxes come together. So we begin with the atoms. And that orientation is built into language. It's a language of nouns, where we understand the world in terms of categories of things, places, people. And we try to understand the relationship as how do they get together? What happens? And we don't have very much of a language of the relations. We have a language of the atoms. We have, at least in English, I think 4,000 or 5,000 terms for just something that goes on people's heads, thoughts, hopes, dreams, wants, wishes, desires, and so on, so on, so on. But this creates a reality for us of separation. Each of us basically and fundamentally alone, trying desperately to understand each other. It is a ontology, a way of looking at the world, which places the value on the individual, which brings me to take care of myself first. That is, each of us out for our own benefit, our own position, our own status. It lends itself, you might say, to an individualism. It lends itself to a world in which we understand nations as separate, cultures as separate, each trying to take care of itself, and should. So the very idea of the world divided into units already brings forth a set of actions and ways of relating that are dividing us. Let's have two political parties. The two parties, single parties, there will be there will be conflict. Two countries, there will be some kind of conflict because each is out for themselves, and there will be conflict among us if you bother me, if you're not like me, so on. So the challenge then was to say, how could we understand relationship in a way that would put the relational process first, prior to the person? Okay? We're just going to reverse it, not people making up relationships, but the process of relating as creating who we take the people to be. Now you can see this easily in a way. You all have names, but the names didn't come into existence until there were people to create the names, people together to create those names. And in fact, there are no categories in language outside of the possibility that we agree on the categories. That is, language cannot be created by any one person. Language only comes into existence through coordination, through agreement. That is, the agreement precedes the categories, precedes everything we can say about each other. The agreement precedes the fact that we can call you a human being. It precedes the fact that we can call you anything, including having the attention deficit. So the process precedes all intelligibility, all that we can say, and in some sense, all the perspectives we can ever bring to the world. So what if we change our focus from the individual well-being to the well-being of that process? what are those processes out of which we can become, by which we can live together, by which we are not slaughtering each other, by which we can together do something about climate. Because if the processes are not working, none of those problems will be solved, and we will be at each other's throat until we can no longer live at all. And that was the imperative. As I see it now, those processes are killing us. Competition among nations, each nation understanding itself having to take care of its own well-being first, already, that works against any kind of cooperation. Yeah, people will cooperate up to the point that maybe it costs them. It kills our political life with parties competing with each other for votes. It kills our personal life with political differences, religious differences, gender differences. Now, I can say more about education because I've written a fair amount about that. But I want to say that there are people in this audience too who've written. Arlene Katz. How can you create another kind of medical education which is collaborative? Jeff Field did his dissertation. Norma Rahm brings multiple epistemologies in Africa. Shanti George applied this to educational evaluation. These are all people among us who try to take these ideas and make them into something that works within educational practices. But education for me is the critical matter, because if we learn how to relate, if those practices of education yield cultures which know how to collaborate, which know how to compromise and create together, we change the future. Education becomes just critical where we're going. I can say much more about this. Some of it's in the book, some of it's in Relational Being.
Yep.
Book called Beyond the Tyranny of Testing, which I've tried to put this in practice. But maybe this is a good place to stop.
Thank you, Ken. I will translate a little bit into Dutch again, so that's perhaps for the new audience a little bit understandable. Dus waar Ken vooral over spreekt, is dat wij in een soort van zelfsprekend verhaal zitten, zeker in het Westen, waarin ons verhaal vooral gericht is op individualisme. Entiteiten noemt hij dat. Je kunt een gezin als een entiteit zien, of een bepaalde culturele groep, of een politieke partij, of een land. En wat je eigenlijk ziet is, doordat we zo gericht zijn op die entiteiten, op die losgekoppelde eenheden, ja, zie je ook dat er wrijving ontstaat tussen groepen. En waar Ken voor pleit in het boek, is dat wanneer we een relationele kijk zouden hebben en de relationele processen op plaats nummer 1 zouden zetten en niet het individu, het welbevinden in een relationeel proces, dan gaan we eigenlijk veel meer openstaan voor elkaar, voor die verschillen tussen die entiteiten die met elkaar in contact gaan en niet een eigen positie blijven behouden, maar eigenlijk samen een betere, hoopvollere toekomst willen gaan creëren. En als je de televisie aanzet vandaag, vanavond, morgen, vorige week, dan zie je heel veel van die entiteiten denken, die individuele oriëntatie noem ik dat zie je dan terug. Nou, kijk maar naar de laatste oorlogen en hoe erop gereageerd wordt. Dan lijkt wel alsof de menselijke ziel niet zo belangrijk is, maar dat er vooral vanuit een bepaalde visie, zeg maar, gekeken wordt. En je komt er tegen in onderwijs en gezondheidszorg. Het is een beetje ontzield allemaal. En eigenlijk zegt de relational imperative, we moeten weer in contact gaan met elkaar. En vanuit dat contact met elkaar, vanuit het respect en waardering en het overbruggen van verschillen, samen nieuwe verhalen maken, zodat we ook nieuwe toekomsten kunnen maken. So I just explained shortly, Ken, about this focus on this individual orientation, the world of entities. And that this makes also perhaps this difficult thing to work together and to collaborate, to build hopeful futures, and that the relational processes, when we put them on the front, on the first place, and when we put well-being of all people in the relational process at place one, then we can make better and hopeful futures together. And I think that's very needed in this area and this time. We will do the following. We gaan het volgende doen. Alex will make new breakout rooms. Some of the participants have found some time to read your book, Ken, so they have a little bit more understanding about the relational imperative, the relationele noodzaak. And the question is for your group is, talk with the other participants about what you have read in the book, or perhaps some questions you have, just dialogue in your group with it. And at the end of your discussion or dialogue, formulate one important question you want to ask Ken to talk about. After 15, 20 minutes, you will come back from the breakout rooms, and then we have some time to talk about your important questions so that we can make also the dialogue a little bit more interactive. So talk with each other and formulate at the end a question you want to put when we are coming together again. Yeah? So Alex will put you in groups of 5 and have fun. Meet each other again. See you in 15 minutes. So welcome back. Fijn dat jullie weer terug zijn in the breakout room. Sometimes the time is too short because then you get new people to know them and to talk with them, and then suddenly you are again back in this plenary discussion. But this can be not the last webinar. We can have new opportunities to meet each other again. Well, I asked you before you left into the breakout rooms to formulate one important question so that we can dialogue a little bit about it. So my question is to put your question into the chat box, because then we can read the question and then we can pick some of them out of it. Perhaps some of them are familiar and then we can combine them. So please put your question into the chat box and then we can start our dialogue. Thank you. Okay, there's one question. Just start somewhere. Yeah, okay. How can you bring the social constructionist perspective into practice? So how can you bring social constructionism into practice? Perhaps I can give an example of my work. Okay, perhaps that's a good idea. So an example of social construction, putting this in practice, is some years ago I was living and working in Suriname, South America. And the question there was, how can we improve the basic education for children? And my vision was, well, I am the expert, and they asked me as an expert, what can we do? But based on social construction, I was thinking, no. That's just the way we talk about experts. But let's find a new way of talking about experts. Why can we all not be experts? The child, the student, the teacher, the parents, the people from the ministry. And so we invited all the people of the whole society to talk about the positive dreams about education. And slowly this process brought more than 10,000 people into movement, talking about how can we make a new story about our Surinamese education instead of a copy of the Dutch colony. And this process became I Believe in You, because one of the people in the audience, the participants, was the director of the Lans Hospital, a hospital for women who give birth to children. And she said in an interview, we should believe in children, because when we really believe in children, then we would do the right things. So that became also the name of the process. So in this process, we used multiple stories, multiple perspectives, also the perspectives of the people who are perhaps a little bit more conservative or more progressive about education. And then we start to dialogue, and from this we produced the book. The book was called I Believe in You, made by the story of thousands of people. And this was used to start up the educational change in Suriname. So that's one short example about social construction, breaking out of the common story and making with people new stories And from these new stories, new language, we build new realities, new futures. Okay, let me see a question. We talked about the how question. How do we move to another perspective? Does it need empathy or distance or a meta position, acceptance? What do you think, Ken? And you can talk with us, the audience. So how do we move to another perspective from the individual perspective to the relational one? How can we do this?
Well, there's possibly two questions there. One of them is a practical question: how, if you've got multiple perspectives, can you bring them together? What sort of, is there a meta perspective which will allow them to join in with each other? That's one way of looking at it. The other one is the question of how can we leap from an individual into this other perspective, which is not so easy because most of us live our lives as individualists. And it's not so easy simply to move into a relational perspective in action. My wife Mary and I practice this for a long time because it's very easy if something goes wrong to find somebody who's wrong. That is, somebody made a mistake. First thing we do, if things don't work out, somebody somewhere is to blame. And we realize that you can do mutual blame as a process for the rest of the day and kill your relationship. So let's not do mutual blame. That very process of relating is already going to alienate. Find another form of conversation, something that does work. As you get into this, you're constantly aware that whatever is happening, we are together making that happen. And it's not just we here together, it is also a backdrop of other people, and to deal with one other question, ultimately of the environment. That is, you could look at the environment too as a participant in the relationship. You have to do some conceptual work, but you can look at yourself as whatever we are, as in dialogue with nature, out of which we become something, nature becomes something. Right? You just have to do some extra work to do it. I'm moving horizontally here, but I may have avoided something in that question that there may be something there I haven't really addressed.
Yeah. Well, perhaps another question, Ken, is what can we do tomorrow? What could be the first step towards relational? Well, here the relational imperative. What can we do? What could be the first step? A small step.
Yeah, I think it depends on where you are. I've begun to feel that it's really difficult to work with systems, large systems, because if you're into that language, defeating in a way, the system is always out there.
Yeah.
So to try to focus locally. I go in a classroom. What is that relational process like that enriches our the value of relationships for us? For example, in our dialogues, I don't know how they went in these little small groups, but they probably took different forms. You can ask different questions, and some will be creative, some will be divisive. How can you create the dialogue out of which we grow together?
I think that's a great suggestion. I think when language makes reality, then I think language is a strong tool to make the first steps. I think I was talking with people last week again in Suriname because I was there, and of course the problems are huge. And how can we change the system? So my answer would be the same: that it's very difficult to change the system. But what we can do indeed is to talk in different ways in our own small communities. So I gave the example in a very difficult situation in Suriname where there is a recession. People need to have 4 jobs to buy their food and to have their living. And of course, then you get frustrated and you start to talk in more negative ways, which is very understandable. But then when we know language can change reality, we can change as a small step, talk with different language. What do we need? Where do we hope for? And how can we build together for tomorrow, perhaps a better day or a better coming together, perhaps. So it helps people to get out of their problem thinking and to step into a way of possibility thinking, more solution-based, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm.
Well, let me make a distinction here, Luke, because your focus on language to me is really within the constructionist perspective. Language is vocal. What language do we use?
Mm-hmm.
When you make that turn into the relational, the focus begins to shift to how do we make that language?
Mm-hmm.
And if I set up a classroom so that there is competition, certain kinds of languages will develop. If I set it up as a collaboration, other things will come out. So that how do you set up a dialogue,
mm-hmm.
which is the practice of the dance of relating, out of which enrichment comes as opposed to, let's say, conflict. I mean, it's my whole sense of the critique of public education is once you set up a school so that everyone is competing, you've already killed the possibility of a lot of relationship.
Mm-hmm.
When you set up a school where the teacher is in charge of the grades of the kids, that relationship between teachers and students is going to be distant in many ways. She's going to become demanding and requiring to get those kids to pass tests. So I'm concerned then with how you set up the conditions of talk together, the scaffolds out of which the conversations develop. But competition is a particular scaffold, and it will move relations in a certain direction, but we can change the scaffold. Grading, testing is the scaffold for a whole lot of complicated relations between students and each other, students and their parents, and their own well-being. We remove grading as our way of evaluation. Make evaluation more dialogic and collaborative, and you change the possibilities for relating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Apples that I'm really centering on right now.
Yeah, thank you. There's a very interesting question of one of the groups, and they are asking, well, Ken, do you also have doubts about your own theory?
Look, I am. I'm not in question of any sort of certainty about anything. So the question to me is not whether the theory is right or wrong, but how is it used, and for what purposes? Where does it limit us? What does it invite? It's the same questions I'd ask of natural sciences or of any perspective. For example, I worry that social construction in many ways has led to, in the United States, a whole politics of untruth. I mean, where the very idea of truth has ceased to make much difference. It's gone out the window. Now, it's one thing to talk about multiple truths, which constructionists do, but where it's been taken is there's no truth at all since it's multiple, then anything goes. but that's not what follows, but that's what's been invited. So yeah, I worry about the ways in which things get used and where they are limited in those respects. Sure.
Okay. I have another question. I will read it loud. We did not quite get to a question, but we spoke about the militarization of global relations through the arms industry that has an interest in creating wars. How can we put a brake on this? There are big money interests in producing more and more weapons. Quite a question, isn't it?
You know, to me, the fundamental question is how you remove the scaffold of competition among nations. If that could be changed, if that very idea of individual, independent nations, each looking out for themselves, you begin to get it in something like United Nations, but United Nations is still a body of independence. How could you change that? I don't have an immediate answer to that question. What I am very interested in right now are massive numbers of movements on a more local level of collaborative governance. That is attempts all over the world to say, let's not look at government as something that controls from top down. Let's look at it as something which we do together. We collaborate, we deliberate, we combine. And I could give you a literature, but there are, as I say, all over the world, there are movements have emerged in one place after another for moving in that more collaborative direction. Now that's grassroots up, but it's inspiring. Mm-hmm. So how could that move to a national level, and how could that move to a global level? Mm-hmm. I suspect that that's terribly optimistic, but it's at least gives one hope.
Yeah.
Strangely enough, by the way, it just may be that the Israel-Palestine issue could conceivably lead to that kind of realization that somehow, if we do not manage to find compromises in these various world conditions, we will bring everybody into a free-for-all fight, which nobody wants.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I have a last question. Then we have used all the questions. And perhaps the group can give a little bit more information about it. I will read it aloud. Is it okay to limit the social environment in social construction, or do we have to expand and expand? I don't really know if I understand the question. Do you understand the question, Ken?
Yeah, I tried to sort of mention that earlier. Mm-hmm. Yeah, when constructionism began, it was really all about humans and human language. And the same with relational theory, it tends to be about human. However, as those dialogues have expanded, there's been this an additional attempt, theoretically and ultimately practically, to bring it all together in some kind of large confluence. I use that term, sort of a flowing together. The one example of that is in organizational change theory. There's a theory called practice theory, and what it is to say that organizations are processes, but it depends on the relation of people to the objects in their room, people in the environments in which they live, the buildings, the environment outside, families. So you have to understand anything that happens in the organization as part of this larger confluence of things moving together, or it's hard to say because they're not things until there's movement, but you understand that it's, you look to the larger flow in which we're involved, not just to the you me, but you me this, that, and
yeah,
outside.
yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Well, looking at the time clock, it's almost 9 o'clock. We have a few minutes, so I think we are good in our schedule, I think. We are almost closing this webinar. Perhaps there's a few minutes just to give some remarks from the audience. I also put 2 links to evaluate this webinar, one in English and one in Dutch. You can see it in the chat box. It would be great if you could find some time to fill it in. But perhaps some reactions of the audience. What do you think about this webinar? What do you take home? Are there some people who want to tell some insights to us? You can put on the microphone. Feel free to speak. Who wants to share?
I do.
Yeah, thank you, Iris.
I just before the breakout, the second breakout, I suggested that we could all link together in the LinkedIn if you have and if you want that. So I thought maybe the whole group I'd like to invite, because I think in the group I had and in the first group there were similar minds. And
Okay,
I
great.
like that very much. That's what I'm searching for, and I found it here. Thank you.
That's great, Iris.
Yeah.
Alex, thank you. Alex will send also, we will send an email the coming week. And there also you can find the link of the Commons, which is a platform for making groups like this. And perhaps
Okay.
that's the best place to do it. But I will
Yeah.
talk with Alex about it, and I will take your idea. And for the other people, feel free to join them in. Yeah? Great
Thank you.
idea, Iris. Thank you. Other comments? You're very curious. You can also express in Dutch.
Zeggen. Ik ben
Ja,
Patricia
tuurlijk.
Vatsilovic en ik heb met veel interesse hiernaar geluisterd. Hartelijk dank. En het doet mij ook denken aan de relatie, de presentiebenadering van Andries Baart. Wellicht hebben jullie daarvan gehoord. Dat is een Nederlander die al sinds jaar en dag ook in dat relationele stuk vanuit de zorg, maar ook in het onderwijs, hele mooie inzichten deelt.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. So it's about presence and about aandachtige betrokkenheid, geloof ik dat hij het ook zo noemt soms. And it suits very much this relational process. Ken was talking about we should put the relational process at the first place and then take care of this relational process, that we all can have our well-being in this process. And I think the work, Patricia, you're talking about from Andries is also about this presence in this relational processes. So we should see each other as human beings, I think, and not positioned in professions and what other things we have invented, but we should meet as human beings again. It's not so difficult, I think, but sometimes we forget. So thank you, Patricia. Other comments? Norma, I see you nodding, like, yes. I don't hear you. Sorry.
I'm nodding to myself that I succeeded in filling in the survey already.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Other people who want to say something or put it in the chat box, it's also okay. You can also express in Dutch.
Hi Loek, Marcel.
Hi Marcel. Ja.
Wat ik super mooi vind, ik doe het even in het Nederlands, want deze vind ik lastig te vertalen, even zo vlug. Het is een avond van verwarring en verwondering. Een geweldig moment van het even zelf ook niet weten. Maar van de andere kant geeft het meteen mij ook hoop voor de toekomst. En dat is wel iets moois om naar te verlangen.
Nice, thank you, Marcel. So Marcel was talking about this great evening today and that he's sometimes confused but sometimes also in wondering, is that a good English expression? You know what I mean, I think. So it makes you questioning the reality, I think. My own personal experience when I was getting to know social construction in 2006, so it's some years ago, it took me some years to really understand social construction. So I had to do things and to read about it and to experience to get really this understanding. So I understand also this way of getting confused, but also this hopeful message. I think that's what I experience in my work, that wherever I come, people go into movement as soon as you appreciate them, and as soon as you connect them, as soon as you give voice to them, and then suddenly new futures are created. That's the hopeful message of social construction, I think. So thank you, Marcel. Perhaps a last comment from one person, and then we are going to close.
Well, Loek, maybe
Yeah.
from me, I don't know if
Bert,
you can see
Bert.
me. I can see myself, so I don't know if I'm in.
I can
if
see you.
See me, but
Yeah.
thank you for the invitation for tonight, and Mr. Gergen, Ken, it is an honor to meet you. I've read some work from you and in translation from Loek. It was very inspiring tonight, and it was inspiring to meet you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Okay, it's 9 o'clock. Then I think we are going to close. The time flies, of course, when you're talking with each other, and of course we need to talk more about this. So perhaps there are more events coming. I put some questions in the forms so you can think about ideas. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Ken, for spending your time with us. Thank you, Alex, for supporting the hosting part. Thank you, participants, to be here this evening. I hope you are going home with a hopeful message that we really can change the future and that we can do it together. I think that's the very hopeful message we can have. And it's my experience that it's really possible. So that's very hopeful, I think. So I want to thank you. Have a nice evening or a nice afternoon, and perhaps we will meet another time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Tot ziens. Bye-bye.